2 Anthony Edwards 40 burgers in 24 hours? You better believe it. We'll break down another Wolves win next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. The Timberwolves finally beat a good team in a close game at home. Not that's the only time they've done that this year, but they just haven't been consistent lately. They won back-to-back games Wednesday night, Thursday night. Ant drops 40 plus both nights. And this was a really impressive win for the Timberwolves. Some chippiness, some technical fouls. Ant having an 18-point opening, or actually, I think he had maybe 20 in the first quarter. And, closing strong as well and shutting the door on Dillon Brooks, the annoying Dillon Brooks and the Houston Rockets. We'll talk about that. There's a lot to get to in this one. Also, we had great performances from all the young guys, Jaylen Clark, Rob Dillingham, and Terrence Shannon Jr. playing rotation minutes. So lots to get to today. First, though, off the top, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder, you can subscribe to the daily newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. One stop for ultimate Wolves coverage and NBA coverage delivered right to your inbox. Again, sign up for free at LockedOnDaily.com. All right. So the Timberwolves come into this game having won Wednesday night, winning a close game, or actually it ended up not being a close game, but what shouldn't have been a close game ended up being a close game. And then finally the Wolves ended up winning by 19 against the Bulls. Ant drops 49, spends the final 2-3 minutes of the game trying to get to 50. Well, guess what? He ran out of gas a little bit in this game. He got to 41. The Timberwolves needed it. They needed it all as they ultimately held on to win by 13. But this thing was close into the fourth quarter against a Rockets team that's obviously very good, was third in the Western Conference coming into the game. And now has slipped to fourth because Denver won on Thursday night. Houston had lost 4 in a row. So this was a 5th consecutive loss for the Houston Rockets, while Denver's won 5 in a row. So it was up to the Wolves to keep them reeling. Some guys were out, no Fred VanVleet. Some other guys who we'll talk about later that didn't play that, certainly helped the Wolves' cause, like Jabari Smith Jr. has been out. Steven Adams did not play, which was significant. Tari Eason did play. He had been questionable coming into the game and didn't play last time out for Houston. But like Ahmed Thompson played, Jalen Green played, Dillon Brooks played, like these dudes all, Alperen Şengün played. Obviously they're all-star. So this was by no means like a dreadfully, the Rockets team wasn't any more shorthanded than Minnesota. Plus the Rockets had the rest advantage, having not played since Tuesday. The Timberwolves just played on Wednesday night, and Ant played a lot of minutes. Guess what? He made it work in this one. The Timberwolves early in the game, it was an offensive explosion for both teams. The Timberwolves actually did a pretty good job of Ant getting off the ball and then getting the ball back and attacking in the half court. Overall, the Wolves had some sloppy turnovers. It was actually kind of a miracle they scored 32 points in the first quarter because they shot it super well. That's really the only way that they did it. They turned it over 6 times. And ultimately for the game, they ended up only turning it over 13 times. So almost half of those turnovers came in the first quarter alone, but they were only down 1 because Ant was great getting to the line. They knocked down some open shots when they got them. And overall shot the 3 ball pretty well. Actually, just for the game, overall they did, but the first quarter they were able to keep pace with Houston. They just could not get stops, reminiscent a little bit of early in the Bulls game on Wednesday night. Then in the second quarter, it was a little bit more of the same, although the bench unit, the Wolves got a boost from the bench unit. We'll talk a little bit more about that, about the young guys. And Ant, when he came back in the game, was cool in the second quarter. Like, I think he only had like 3 second quarter points, but the Terrence Shannon Jr. saw his first minutes in the rotation, first non-garbage time minutes. Of course, he had the foot injury, was out for like a month or so. has been on the bench last couple games, but just hasn't played rotation minutes at all. He got a chance to play, obviously, with the injuries to Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle, and ineffectiveness. When Josh Minott got a chance to be in the rotation, he struggled. And Terrence Shannon got an opportunity in the second quarter and immediately knocked down a right corner three off a pass from Naz Reid. Then he had a big dunk, pump fake in the corner, drove that same baseline, and had a nice dunk toward the end of the second quarter. Missed an open three, and there was one other play he made defensively that was, not perfect. But overall, a jolt of energy for the 7 minutes he was on the floor. Looked the part of an NBA player as we thought he might. You see a team like Houston that's got a bunch of long athletes that run and just play hectic basketball. Terrence Shannon, that's what he did at Illinois. Like, my scouting report on TJ Shannon was, this dude's a terror in transition. He's going to play fast. He's got an NBA body. He's a volume 3-point shooter. He's not a sharp shooter, but he can shoot. He's got unlimited range. He's happy to get it up. He's going to run on you. He's going to run down your throat in transition and dunk on you. He's going to get to the free throw line. He's going to play at a breakneck speed. This was the perfect game to put TJ Shannon in the game. And kudos to Chris Finch for doing that in the second quarter. We'll talk a little bit about Rob here in a little bit and Jaylen Clark. But the Wolves at halftime were actually down by 5 points. They were down 6 going to the fourth quarter. The third quarter was kind of back and forth. And then Anthony Edwards locked back in. And Ant completely dominated the fourth quarter, along with Naz Reid. Naz Reid played really well also. Was big on the glass for Minnesota, especially late. Was really tough in this game. Just played a really strong game. In fact, Chris Finch closed with Naz Reid at the 5. Gobert off the floor. This was pretty interesting. Naz played 36 minutes in this game, second to only Anthony Edwards. He was a plus 25 in a game the Wolves won by 13. Rudy played 34 minutes, only 2 minutes less than Naz, and was a plus 2. So when the Wolves went small, the Rockets really didn't have any answer. And the Rockets starting lineup is relatively small with, there's no Steven Adams and there's no Jabari Smith. And so it's a relatively small lineup. I mean, Şengün and Tari Eason are your front court. And Jock Landale's the only guy with size coming off the bench for Houston with the other guys out. So it made sense for the Wolves to play small. And actually, I don't think Rudy played bad in this game. Actually, he was important on the glass too. We'll talk more about the Wolves overall rebounding the ball super well in this game once again. But Naz was just that good. Like, he was more physical than we're used to seeing him on the glass. He had the dust up. We'll talk about here in a moment with Jock Landale. And that came in the wake of, coming down the floor after he was frustrated on the other end. And got into it a little bit with, I think it was Jayshawn Tate who kept trying to start stuff in this game. And then ultimately it was Naz and Landale that got into it in a jump ball situation. But Naz played with an edge in this game. He played with tenacity on the glass. I thought he made the right choices offensively with the ball in his hands. He had 4 assists in this game. And that was really big. So him and Ant were awesome in the fourth quarter. And Ant, like, second quarter, third quarter, looked just completely exhausted. He looked like he was down for the count. And then he had this flurry in the fourth quarter where he got to the line, had a couple and ones, knocked down a couple of threes, and all of a sudden he's at 41 points. He had like 18 in the first quarter. I think he had like 3 in the second quarter, barely scored in the third quarter, and then exploded again in the fourth. And then it again looked just completely exhausted at the end of the game. Now, remember, again, the Wolves played Wednesday night. He scored 49, and he tried really hard to get to 50. And then he had to come back and play 38 minutes the next night. And he really did. Like, I know they ended up winning by 13, but this was like Ant and Naz willing the Timberwolves to victory. And thankfully, the young guys in the middle stages of the game, and Mike Conley, really, all those guys played well and helped get this thing to a point where Ant could drag them over the finish line. I want to talk about a couple of key elements of this game that the Wolves did really well in. I want to talk about Jaylen Clark. I want to talk about rebounding. Want to talk about fast break opportunities for both teams in this game. We'll close the show today, as we always do on the post-game pod, with individual studs and duds. That's all upcoming next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you also get 4% APY on your cash in non-retirement accounts. That's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate subject to change. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 per month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right, a couple things stood out in this one for the Wolves from a production standpoint. This was massive on Wednesday night in the win over the Bulls. The Timberwolves dominated the offensive glass, which seemed completely out of character. I mentioned on the postgame pod, which would have been Thursday's show, that when you look into it, it's actually not that far out of character for this year's Timberwolves team. They came into the game against the Bulls like 14th in offensive rebound rate, according to Clean the Glass, which is a departure from last year when they were a bottom tier, a bottom third team in the league all year long in terms of offensive rebounding. Now, if you include the Bulls game from Wednesday night, coming into the game against the Rockets on Thursday, the Timberwolves were up to 13th in the NBA in offensive rebound rate. And don't look now, but the Timberwolves just grabbed, let's see, they had 23 offensive rebounds against the Bulls. They grabbed 18 more offensive rebounds against Houston. And it's not like the Wolves shot the ball that poorly. In the Houston game, they were 48% from the field, 41% from three. Against Chicago, they were 43% from the field, but they were 43% from three. So they missed a lot of shots in the paint in that game. They did play some volleyball. They played some patty cake on the backboard, Kevin Love, Moses Malone style a little bit against the Bulls. Less so against the Rockets. There was a little bit of it, and that's part of the game. But those still count, right? Like getting your own offensive rebounds off missed bunnies in the paint, those still count. Those are still extra opportunities. The Timberwolves have 18 offensive rebounds in this game. They ended up being a +8 on the glass, a +6 on the offensive glass. Jaden McDaniels had 5 offensive rebounds. 5 offensive rebounds. He had 3 against the Bulls on Wednesday. Remember last year in the playoffs when he was so big against Phoenix, corner crashing against a team that was susceptible to corner crashing and against a team that was susceptible to length, athleticism, and aggressiveness on the offensive glass? That's the Jaden that it felt like we saw in this game. And he started slow, like started poorly from the field. He was 0 for 4 from 3 overall on the night. But I thought he played well, and his offensive rebound was a big part of it. The Wolves as a team, this is now, like, I don't want to say it's actually part of their identity because I think it's still a bit dicey. And sure enough, actually in this game, the Timberwolves gave up how many fast break points? 23 fast break points to Houston. That was just as much off of turnovers, frankly. I mean, they gave up 17 points off turnovers. I bet half of those were fast break, just live ball turnovers, middle of the floor. And on the night, the Wolves only had 13 turnovers, which is palatable, especially compared to what they were doing earlier this year. So, it's obviously a give and take, right? It's a push and pull. If you're going to crash the glass and not rotate back defensively, you're going to give up some buckets. And that's why, in general, the Wolves' philosophy the last year and a half, really 2.5 seasons, since they got Rudy Gobert was, hey, look, let's play solid half-court defense. Let's figure out our half-court offense. Because our defense is so good when it's set, we can win a bunch of games. And sure enough, that worked last year for 56 regular season wins and a conference finals berth. This year, the offense started off so disjointed. I don't want to say sluggish because it was potent, but there were so many turnovers and certainly acclimating Julius Randle was part of it, acclimating Dante DiVincenzo. But the last couple of weeks, the offensive rebound rate's been through the roof. And I can pull up, actually, I could do this since January 1. I'll do that real quick. What the offensive rebound rate is. Of course, this isn't going to include the Rockets game, which is only going to make it higher. But the Timberwolves are 4th in the NBA in offensive rebound rate, not including last night's Rockets game. Since Jan 1, the Wolves are 4th in the NBA in offensive rebound rate. They're also number 1 in free throw rate. And they're 9th in effective field goal percentage. So they're still taking and making the right shots. But the offense itself is actually still top 5. Before the Rockets game, when they dropped 127 on 48% shooting and 41% from 3, the Timberwolves have a top 5 offense and a top 10 defense. So yeah, the Wizards' loss was gross. The Kings' loss was disappointing. But we're talking about a team that is ascending. and has papered over the absences of Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle to an extent. Let's not count our chickens before they hatch, because we're still a few games away from the All-Star break here. But this game was just another another piece of evidence that the Timberwolves have adjusted their offensive identity a little bit. It's driving kick game. It's getting downhill and forcing the defense to commit fouls. Now, Houston actually ended up shooting, like, yes, it felt like Ant got a ton of free throw attempts again, and he did. Houston actually attempted 4 more free throws than Minnesota. The Timberwolves were called for 3 more personal fouls in this game than Houston was. So it's not like they were just getting the benefit of a good whistle. The Wolves were getting downhill and earning their trips to the free throw line. And a night after going 17 for 18 from the charity stripe, Ant went 14 of 15. So 2 consecutive just insane shooting nights for Anthony Edwards from the field and from the free throw line. But philosophy-wise, again, getting downhill, getting into the lane, driving kick to still get your 3-point attempts, because the Wolves did still get up 39 threes in this game, 8 more than Houston, and they made 16, which was 4 more than Houston, and they got to the line 24 times. It's hard to imagine a better offensive mix for Minnesota in terms of the types of shots they were getting as a team. You'd like them to make a few more in the paint. Like, there were a couple of missed shots, like Jaylen Clark missed a couple layups. Naz Reid missed a couple of layups. Rudy missed at least one easy one. Jaden missed a couple in the paint. Like, these guys all missed kind of simple shots. I shouldn't say simple shots. Shots they would tell you they should have made. But the Wolves made up for it because they shot threes so well in this game, and they got to the free throw line. Let's talk about the young player production, because they're not necessarily going to hit studs and duds. Jaylen Clark will. We'll save Jaylen Clark. I mentioned Terrence Shannon's 7 minutes that he played in the first half. Rob Dillingham only scored 6 points on 5 shots, and he missed both of his 3-point attempts, but I thought he played well. I know he didn't have any assists either, but when he had his little boost of scoring in the second half was a really critical time. He had a couple of nice, tough buckets in the paint, had a really nice kind of drive, stop on a dime, spin and shoot from 10, 12 feet. I think he had 2 layups in the layups where he got all the way to the cup and scored. I thought this was a really good yet otherwise quiet Dillingham game. And Luka Garza only played 2 minutes, but he was a world better than he was last time out on Wednesday night. He actually, I thought, provided some resistance, grabbed a couple of rebounds. Like, it was nice to see him not be a complete zero in this game, or a negative, really. So that was all positive. Let's talk about the physicality of this game and how the Wolves overcame that. Dillon Brooks was doing Dillon Brooks things. It actually started with Jaylen Tate trying to get under the skin of Anthony Edwards at the end of the first quarter. And Ant did a pretty good job of just kind of moving on. And then in the second quarter, Jaylen Tate tried to block Rudy's shot. Rudy was actually pump faking and passing, and jumped over Rudy's head, kind of landed on his neck, leading to free throws for Gobert. And Ant came all the way over to the scorer's table by Chris Finch. Ant was not on the floor at the time, was on the bench, came all the way over by Chris Finch to yell at Jaylen Tate and tell him it was BS for landing on Gobert the way he did, which is nice to see. You know, obviously not surprising to see Ant do that, but I'm sure that his teammates love that about him defending his teammates. And then you get Ant to Dillon Brooks getting into a little bit. Dillon Brooks, that was very shortly after that, I think. Yeah, it was, because it was when Ant came back in the second quarter, and he kind of shoved Dillon Brooks, because Brooks was basically face guarding him in the half court off the ball. And they got into it a little bit, face to face, no technicals. And then later in the game, Dillon Brooks, this one actually didn't even get talked about on the broadcast, but he straight up elbowed Nickeil Alexander-Walker in the throat when Alexander Walker was guarding him. I think it was late third quarter. It was an actual elbow to the throat, and Curtis Blair, the official, was standing there and kind of shrugged and took his whistle out of his mouth and said something to Nickeil, basically, I didn't see it, or it was nothing, or he didn't actually hit you. He clearly did, and Nickeil was bothered by it. Well, we got to see a lot more Dillon Brooks in this one as well. There was the flop warning, which came right after he was trying to be super tough, then comes out and flops on Terrence Shannon. I think it was Terrence Shannon, and literally just fell over. Shannon waved him off, and then it was after the wave off that the officials called the flop on it, which was the correct call. I think that was also Curtis Blair. Hilarious, because I've seen that called, could count on one hand the number of times I've seen that called live in a game. And then you had the Jaylen Tate trying to get under Naz Reid's skin, and then on the other end of the floor, Naz gets fired up after getting the ball stripped from him. Jaden gets a block. Naz gets the jump ball. rips it away from Jock Landale, who shoves Naz, and then Rudy shoves Landale. You get the double text. Things kind of de-escalated from there, although then Ant let Dillon Brooks have it right between the eyes a couple of times down the stretch to really cement the game, get his 1,003 of his career. I should have said this earlier in the show. 1,003 of Ant's career, fastest in NBA history to get to 1,003s, the most 40-point games of any Timberwolves player, individual 40-point games of any Wolves player in franchise history, and the third Wolves player to ever have consecutive 40-plus point games. I think only Andrew Wiggins and Kevin Love have done it previously. So, but letting Brooks have it between the eyes a couple of times was great. It's absolutely what Dillon Brooks deserved. And Ant had some great comments after the game about like, hey, if we want to grab and pull and, be physical, fine, we're grown men. But like, if you start punching and getting up in my face like you were, like, that's when, that's not okay. I'm obviously paraphrasing. Ant said it in a much more colorful fashion than me. But credit to the Wolves for really like, sticking up for each other. Ant sticking up for Rudy sticking up for Naz. Naz not backing down, which isn't a surprise. Ant not backing down, which isn't a surprise. And the Timberwolves giving it right back to Houston. They weren't going to let kind of an upstart Rockets team. Obviously, Dillon Brooks is a vet, but overall an upstart, younger Rockets team come into Target Center where the Wolves have struggled this year and were on a back-to-back. They weren't going to let them just come in and clown them. That was a real response from the Timberwolves. It was really, really nice to see. I want to close with studs and duds. We'll peek at the standings. The Wolves have made a move in the Western Conference standings. We'll talk about all that next here to close the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by our title sponsors at Game Time. Looking for tickets to your next big event? Whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for a while now, and there's plenty of reasons to love it. One is the curated deals. They make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. There's just no more sifting through thousands of options. Plus, you can grab super deals for prime seats. Absolute steal in terms of the value. The seat view feature also is a game changer. Before you even hit buy, you can see exactly what your seat will look like in the venue, and it's certainly reassuring. The best part is you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's talk studs and duds. Anthony Edwards is obviously a stud in this game. 41 points on 11 of 25 shooting, 5 of 12 outside the arc. Continues to be just an absolute flamethrower from deep. I know he said after the game on Wednesday he wouldn't do the three-point contest because basically he said because it'd be weird because he wouldn't get to dribble, which is true. That's fair, and I agree that like that's not Ant's speed. Like he's got to be, he's got to have a defender on him. Like, yes, he can catch and shoot, but also shooting off a rack is not catch and shoot either. It's different. Anyway, really good. 14 of 15 from the line, and that after going 17 of 18. So what's that? 41 of 43 across 2 games. Did I do that math right? I think so. I don't know. I think that's right. 41 of 43. No, 31 of 33 makes more sense. Across 2 games from the free throw line, which is awesome. 7 rebounds, 6 assists, only 4 turnovers. And again, in 38 minutes, to have 6 assists, to get up 25 shots, to have the ball in his hands as often as he did, and have Houston, who's a really aggressive. I talked a little bit about how they had 6 first quarter turnovers and 13 overall for the game. Like, this is a Houston team that's they're 6th in the league in forcing opponent turnovers, and they run in transition off of turnovers. I know pace-wise, like if you look at Basketball Reference, they're middle of the pack. But if you dig a bit deeper, this is a Houston team that's happy to turn you over and then run once they convert the steal, or once they get the steal, they want to go convert it. The Houston transition game is 3rd in the league in terms of points added per 100 possessions. They're 5th in both off of live rebounds and off of steals. And overall, they're third in transition, 10th overall in terms of offense there. And their half-court defense, or half-court offense, excuse me, is actually bottom 5. They're 26th in points per 100 plays in the half-court. So Houston, they're kind of a middle-of-the-pack offense overall. They do their damage by turning you over and getting out in transition. And other than a couple, like I think 2 advanced 4 turnovers were lazy passes early in the game that really hurt the Wolves. But overall, to only have 4 turnovers in 38 minutes and have 6 assists and get up 25 shots, that's a positive thing for Ant. He played really well overall. Next stud, I think I'm actually going to go Jaden McDaniels. It's weird because he was 0 for 4 from 3 and he started slow. And I'm hard on Jaden because I think sometimes he can be a real negative to the offense. But he's been good lately. And he had 12, 8, and 4 in this game, plus a block, 6 of 15 shooting, which isn't great. But the activity level was good. He was a plus 22 in the game. He had tough defensive assignments, and I thought he played well. Like, I think he was a big reason for the Timberwolves winning this game. And also his toughness and his surprisingly restraint at times was great. Like, I thought he definitely contributed positively to this one for Minnesota. I'm really struggling with the third one. I said I would talk about Jaylen Clark earlier. I think I gotta go with Naz. For all the reasons I already mentioned, Naz has to, I think it's got to be Ant, Jaden, and Naz. And I'll talk about Jaylen here in a minute. Naz had 15 and 11, but he also had 4 assists, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. So 4 stocks and 4 assists for Naz. 6 of 16 shooting. He was only 2 of 8 on threes. He was 4 of 8 on twos, including an and one. He was a plus 25, as I mentioned earlier, in a 13-point win for Minnesota and closed the game at the 5 for the Timberwolves. Really, really strong game from Naz Reid. Mike Conley, I got to shout out Conley. This was his best game in a while. 16 points on 6 of 8. He was 4 for 4 on threes. He hit 2 in the first quarter as the Wolves were trying to keep pace with Houston that were big. He also had 5 assists, only 1 turnover. He had 3 rebounds, a steal, and a block. So really, as far as Mike Conley performances go these days, kind of a stat-stuffing performance for Conley. Jaylen Clark was awesome. Second and third quarters, he was just massive. He finished with 17 points on 5 of 9, 4 of 6 on threes. He was 1 of 3 on twos, and I think both his misses were like point-blank layups. One was contested. The other one was just he blew it. 3 of 4 on free throws, 3 offensive rebounds. I've said, I think on every show since Jaylen Clark started playing, that he's going to have an impact on the glass as a guard. He's not done it on the defensive glass yet, but he's done it on the offensive glass from an activity level standpoint. An assist in this game, too, was a -8 in 19 minutes, but I thought he played extremely well. And again, drew tough defensive assignments. If Jaylen Clark's going to score, I mean, he's not going to score 17 points in 19 minutes every night, but like for him to go 4 of 6 on threes and overall having shot the ball well as an NBA player in an extremely small sample, that's huge. That's very encouraging. If he can do that, he's a better defender than your like typical quote unquote 3-and-D guy. He's not as long as a lot of those guys. Like doesn't have the length of a, I don't know, insert 3-and-D guy here, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, for instance. But I think he's a better defender than a lot of those guys because he's so strong and he's got the right build and the technique is so sound. Everything about how he defends is very impressive. He got beat off the dribble a couple times in this game, but recovered to still force difficult shots and misses. Just the instincts overall are very impressive for Jaylen Clark. He played really well. We've talked about everyone that's played. Like, this was great. There's no duds. Nickeil was only 1 of 4 in this game, but he had a couple assists. He had a steal. He was a plus 11, which was the 4th best mark on the Timberwolves. So really, all 10 guys. I mean, look at Finchie playing 5 guys off the bench in this game. All 10 guys that played well for Minnesota. This was a very impressive win. I know they gave up a lot of points, but the defense in the second half, they only gave up 43 points total in the second half of this game, was strong. The half-court defense against a mediocre to bad half-court offense was solid. And the Timberwolves, the offensive glass work that I mentioned earlier was massive in this game. 18 offensive rebounds. They overcame the fast break points they gave Houston, and they didn't serve too many balls up on platters as the game wore on. After the first quarter, they did a much better job taking care of the ball and, limiting those opportunities for Houston. All right, really nice win for the Wolves. The Timberwolves are now in a virtual tie for 6th place with the LA Clippers. because they've played 2 more games, they've won 1 more and lost 1 more than the Clippers. They are technically 0.002 percentage points behind the Clippers for 6th, but they're both 12.5 games back from first. So they're basically tied. And the Wolves swept the season series against the Clippers. They won all 3 games. So they already have that tiebreaker. So I guess the season couldn't end today because they played 2 more games than the Clippers. But they're essentially in the 6th spot right now. They also have a better point differential than the Clippers and better than the Lakers and the tiebreaker over the Lakers, who are in 5th and 2 games ahead of them. And they're now only 3.5 games behind Houston for the 4th spot in the Western Conference. So don't look now. But the Timberwolves continue to ascend. And obviously the All-Star break's coming up. Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo will hopefully be back shortly thereafter. The Wolves have Portland on Saturday, who's been playing great lately. So obviously the Wolves have already lost twice to Portland. So let's not sleep on the Blazers. And they've won, I think, 4 or 5 in a row now. But they get Portland Saturday and then at Cleveland on Monday, then home for a back-to-back Milwaukee and OKC, which is about as tough as it gets leading into the All-Star break. Wolves Houston coming out of the All-Star break, first game after the break. So really difficult schedule. After Portland, you're talking, Milwaukee record-wise isn't outstanding, but they're playing a lot better. Cleveland, Milwaukee, OKC, Houston, and then after the break, OKC, Lakers. That is a difficult stretch for the Timberwolves. So banking this win against Portland to get them to 30 wins and 7 above 500, which would be a high water mark for this season, would be huge for the Timberwolves. I'm not going to spend much time previewing Portland today. We got to close out the show, but they did beat Portland the first time they played them at home way back in early November. That was the second night of a back-to-back, but then they lost twice on the road at Portland on a back-to-back, consecutive games, obviously on consecutive nights. So they're actually 1-2 against Portland, and Portland's playing better. So this is a big game to win this one, get to 30 wins, get to 7 above 500 before going to Cleveland on Monday night. All right, that's all we got for you today here on the show. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder, you can also subscribe to the Locked On Wolves newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. One-stop shop for all things Wolves and NBA. Sign up for free at LockedOnDaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.